Excited to be here. I'm excited to be in the house of God. I'm excited to be here to be able to worship, especially as we get closer to this time of remembrance of what the birth of Christ meant for us. Amen. And I begin to think, I heard this song, I believe it goes, what other king would abandon his throne? And I begin to think about that. As we think about Jesus coming down, we always think about the scene, the nativity scene, little baby Jesus in a manger, But if we just really thought about that for a minute, and we actually thought about what that scene is truly showing us, you had the God, the creator of everything, of the universe, of everything we see, of life. You had the God who has always been here, who has always existed, and then you have him coming down to earth as a baby to be born in a manger for the salvation of everyone. You have this picture of the God of everything humbling himself and coming down to us because we needed him. And he saw that we needed him, and he sent his son to die for us. And when I begin to think about what other God would do that, we think about, there's so many religions in the world today. There's so many different religions, and they all have their own gods. They all have their own things. But what other God in any other religion has ever went that far for their people? What other God has ever done that for a people who was helpless? You look at these other gods and all these other religions, they're always these high and mighty beings who like to smite people, or they just like the power, or they like just the people. But what other God would come down and die for their people? What other God would abandon their throne? Because you got to think where he's coming from. Am I echoing really bad up here? No? Does it sound okay out there? Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback. I just feel like there's a speaker right behind me, and I can hear myself. It's really throwing me off. But I begin to think about what other God would do that. What other God would come down for their people? And it kind of draws that same line. Sometimes I forget, because we've never known a life before Jesus. We were obviously born after Jesus died for us, so we didn't know what it was like to be without that. To be in that place to where you had, where you knew you were supposed to be. God set out these rules and we knew what we were supposed to do, but we didn't really have a way to get there. We've never experienced that. We've always had this bridge. We've always had this help. And I'm thankful for that. I begin to think about that and I get a little excited because I think, God, the length that you went to get to me is amazing. And I think sometimes we don't really see it, especially because sometimes we forget just how separated we were from God. Sometimes we forget just how far away we were from God and his presence. Before Jesus, there was no good. You had to do these sacrifices, and you had to do all these rituals, and you had to do all these things. And even then, you still had this separation. You had this veil. You had this curtain that cut you off from the presence of God. Because if you were to go into the presence of God in your sinful state, you would die. God is such a holy God that if you went into his presence in your sinful state, God said, you would die. I began to read in Exodus where God came down on the mountain and he told Moses, he said, listen, I'm going to come down on the mountain and you're going to come up to me, but you don't let anybody else on this mountain. If anybody even touches this mountain, they will die, because God's presence was on that mountain. And we were in such a state of decay and sin that we could not be in the presence of God. But God, longing for his people, sent his son so that we could go on the mountain. Can I tell you this morning, we can go onto the mountain. We can walk up the mountain because of what Jesus done for us. We no longer have to stay on the outside. We can go up the mountain, and that excites me. Man, when we come into this building and we begin to worship, we are going up the mountain. We are going behind the veil. Sometimes we think, it's like a checklist. I come in, we have 3 songs, there's preaching, we have a few more songs, and I go home. But when we enter into this building and we begin to enter into praise and worship, we are going behind the veil into God's presence. Nothing else matters at that point. I come in, and I'm not always successful at it because life can always get busy, but I try to come in and just clear everything else away and think I'm going into the presence of God this morning. I'm going to get something this morning because God is going to be here. Where his people are at and where his people are congregated together, he said, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I will be also. But God is inviting us up that mountain. God is inviting us into his presence. So after I preach, and this isn't even my sermon. I'll get into that in a minute. But after I get done, when we begin to worship again, I want us to keep that visual in our mind. I'm going behind the curtain. I'm going into the presence of God, and it is an awesome presence. There when they consecrated the temple and the power of God fell, and nobody could even get close to the temple because the power of God's presence was so strong. I want to go into the presence of God, and now we have a way. I think sometimes it loses its meaning because we just forget how separated we were from God. But we have a way now to get back to God. We have a bridge. So with that being said, now I will get into what I want to talk about. So like Pastor Kai said, we are continuing on with our Christmas at the movies. And the movie we're going to be talking about a little bit today is going to be The Polar Express. I don't know if any of you have ever seen The Polar Express. I had not until Kai sent me. He was like, hey, you're going to be doing The Polar Express. I was like, hey, I've never seen that, so I better go watch it. And I'm not going to lie, I watched like half of it, all right? But I got the gist of the movie, One thing that really cracked me up was, I don't know if anybody else, like I said, if you've seen it, if you've noticed the eyes in that movie, they really freaked me out. So then I was like, can I finish this movie? They're freaking me out. And I little backstory on that, because I looked it up. I was like, why are these eyes so weird in this movie? And it was apparently at the very beginning of like all that, where they, stick the dots to you and everything. But they just didn't do a very good job with the eyes. So the eyes just looked really lifeless. And it said that it was a big thing for a while where the eyes, but I was like, we turned that movie on and I was like, man, something's not right here. Something looks wrong. I don't know what it is. I couldn't place it. I was like, dude, their eyes are weird. They're not moving. Their eyes weren't showing any emotion. I was like, but anyway, that's my little, I liked it. I liked it. All right. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it because it's a good kids movie. There you go. But it's not showing the eyes, of course. It's just showing. But it is an all right movie, The theme of the movie, I'm not going to spoil really anything if you haven't seen it. But the big theme of the movie is you have this boy, and he, at the beginning of the movie, it kind of goes through, he has lost his belief in Christmas. Christmas to him has kind of lost this enchanted feeling. And he begins to go through, and then as he's losing this faith in Christmas and doubting everything about Christmas, you have this giant train show up outside of his house, out of nowhere, and he gets on, right? And that was like problem number one for me in the movie, because I was like, if a giant train shows up outside my house, the last thing I'm doing is getting on that thing. You know what I mean? That thing just rolled up. And he's just like, all right, I'll get on, whatever, But that might just be kids. I don't know, because I'm not 100% convinced my kids wouldn't get on. I'm sure they would, But I began to think about, that meaning, that kind of theme behind the movie of losing his faith in Christmas. And the whole movie is him on this journey to go and find that faith, go and find that re-enchantment in Christmas. And, as we look at the Christmas holiday and kind of what it's become, I begin to think about, the world and how it has kind of lost that faith or that enchantment when it comes to the birth of Jesus Christ. The birth of Jesus has kind of lost this mystical, enchanted feeling. When I talk about Jesus and we talk about his birth, and as I said a while ago, it was God coming down in human form to be born in a manger. And so as we talk about that, that has some, that's just crazy if you think about it. There is something enchanting behind that. It is magical. It is mystical. And I think sometimes we can miss that. I think sometimes we can miss what's really happening in that scene. And I don't know if any of you have felt the same way. I know at some point in my life, and I don't know where it happened, but Christmas kind of lost that feeling. You know, I look at my kids as Christmas gets close, and especially Christmas Eve when they're going to bed, and they're like, oh man, I'm not going to go to sleep. Oh man, I'm going to try to wake up and catch Santa tonight, you know. And I don't know how loud I'm being, but. So they have this kind of enchantment in their eyes. There's this excitement there that they just don't want to go to bed because they know something special is going to happen tonight. And I was trying to remember a time in my life where that kind of faded, because I think it's happened to every one of us. You know, we go from getting toys and being super excited about it to getting a nice pair of jeans. You know, there's some transition somewhere along the way where I can sleep really good Christmas Eve because it's kind of lost this enchanted feeling. And I began to think about what causes that. You know, where's the shift? What are the things that can kind of contribute to that, or even to the movie with this boy losing his faith? Or even to losing that enchantment in the birth of Jesus? What are some things that can kind of lead to that? And so I came up with a list because I really like lists. If you ask my wife, I am a list kind of guy. If we're cleaning the house, you better have a list, because if we don't, I don't know what to do. I'm confused. We're going to get lost. So I like my lists. But the list I came up with onto why we can lose that enchantment, it's either because, or all three, I have logic, life, and lies. So we have 3 L's. And these are the 3 things that I begin to think about can drown out or begin to darken that sense of enchantment that surrounds the birth of Jesus. Because when I think about the birth of Jesus, you know, we'll get into it a little bit later, but I wanted to kind of preface. When I think about the birth of Jesus, I think about a light. You know, it says over the verses we're going to be going over today, I think about a light being shined into the darkness. I don't know if shined is the word. Shone, shined, something. But a light being brought forth into a very dark world. And when I think about darkness, I think about being lost. I think about growth. You know, I don't know if you've ever been in complete darkness. There was one time, I don't remember how old I was, but we went like to those caves. They've got a lot of caves around here, you know. And so I went to those caves, and they were like, all right, we're going to do this thing where we shut the lights out. And that, when you're down there in a cave and there is no light, I'm telling you, that is dark. That is darkness. And it's like, I know where I want to be. I want to be on the surface, but I just don't know how to get there. And when I think about darkness, I think about a people that somewhere deep down, they know where they need to be or where they want to be, but they are just groping around trying to find their way there. So when I think about before Jesus, I think about a people who knew, I need to get to God. And these are the things that he's laid out for me to get there. I just don't know how to get there. God kind of laid out the path with the law, but then there was no real good way to get there. And when I think about Jesus shining into that darkness, I think about him showing us a way to get there. But there's times in life where we can kind of crawl back into the dark. Where we can kind of crawl back into the dark, either because the light, now can I tell you something about the light? Again, I'm getting a little off topic, but something about the light is it's going to expose, all right? So yeah, the light can be uncomfortable at times. Sometimes people choose the dark. Sometimes we find ourselves in the dark and we don't even know how we got there. If I were to make one wrong turn when I'm down in those caves, I'll tell you, I'll find myself and I'll be like, how did I get here? And it's really hard to find our way back. And with these 3 L's that we're going over, sometimes we can find ourselves in the dark, especially when it comes to the birth of Jesus or that enchantment. So the first one I have is logic. Now, God gave every one of us brains that can think, right? That was what kind of separated us from everybody else. Not from everybody else, from the animals, right? Animals can think, but they just kind of have this one-track lizard brain, you know, where it's just all reactive. God gave us the ability to reason, to think things out. And, I mean, if you look at everything that people have done, the things that people have built, the technology that has came out, you can see that brain in action, you know. And I begin to think about that logic part of it and how people sometimes like things to make sense so much. You know, we're always looking for the logic in it. We're always looking for the way that, hey, this is what makes sense to me. This is how I have logically worked this out. Some people's logic works a little better than others. I think about my kids, and sometimes I want to just be able to take a quick peek into their mind sometimes, just really see what's going on in there. Because sometimes my kids will just do the most wild things, and I'm like, how did you think that was going to work? What point in your mind did you connect these dots? And yeah, I can do that, and that's going to be that's fine. I can do that. I don't know if I've told this story, but we have stairs in our house, and there's not very many. It's 10, but it's pretty high, especially when you compare it to he was 2, a 2-year-old. Those are some high steps. And I remember being there watching TV one time, and the stairs are over here. And I just see my 2-year-old flying through the air. And he hits the ground, and he rolls, and he looks at me, wide-eyed. I was like, yeah, don't do that again. He's like, okay. I was like, all right. I don't know why, or what point in his mind where he was standing at the top of the stairs, and he's like, I can do that. That's okay. I'll make it. It'll be fine. But God gave us all an ability to reason things out and to have logic. But he also gave us an ability to have faith in things that we can't always reason out. And so this logic can kind of get us into trouble. I want to read a little bit from 2 Kings because I begin to think about different examples of times that logic was used or could have been used in the Bible. And if you look at 2 Kings 19, okay, and we begin to look at Assyria has surrounded Hezekiah, and it's, I don't know if you guys remember that story, the Assyrians came up, and this guy came up, and he's like, listen, and there's a lot. When you think about what was left here with Hezekiah, and you think about these Assyrians who have been marching through and really just taking over a lot of people, a lot of territory, this was probably a very big army. I know it was a very big army. Okay, this was a huge army, and they have completely surrounded them, and they're laying siege to their town, and they come forward, and in a gist of it, it's in 2 Kings 19. It starts in verse 8, if you guys want to go back and read that, but I'll give you the rundown of it. He comes up, and he says, hey, listen. He said, don't let your God fool you into thinking that you can be saved. He said, there's been plenty of other people with plenty of other gods who have not saved them, and your God will not be able to save you. In a gist, that's what he's saying. He's saying it doesn't matter what you do. You can go pray to whoever you want. If you don't turn yourself over, if you don't give up, we're going to come in and we are going to destroy you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Now, I begin to think about that in a sense of today, if we were in this building, right? Let's say there's just the people that we have here right now, and a group of about 200,000 other people surrounded the church and was like, hey, in a minute, we're going to come in. Logically, I would look at that situation and I would say, we better throw the white flag up. We better do something because there's no way. There's too many of them. But what happened was, if you look down a little bit further, trying to see where it was at, right here in verse 35, and it says, and this is after prayers and prophecies, but then it says, and that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then I don't know how to say that guy's name, Sennacherib. Okay. I looked to Deb because she would know, and then I just wanted to see if she nodded. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived at Nineveh. So you have this army that's encamping around, and it looks pretty hopeless. But can I tell you, when situations look hopeless, you add God to the mix. There's always a way. That night, an angel from God, went down and killed 185,000 of them and delivered his people. And I began to think there was no logic thinking behind that. There was no way anybody could have deduced that without God. And sometimes we can get in trouble in a more relatable sense. When I think about the movie, the Polar Express, there was a point where it's towards the beginning, and he's reading, and he reads that there's no habitable life in the North Pole. He's reading this history book, it says nothing can live in the North Pole. It's desolate, it's cold. And so he uses that logic, and he says, well, how can Santa live up there? And that's where it kind of starts to go downhill. And if we're not careful, we can tie in that same logic into today. I begin to think about, man, if I were to logically think about a God coming down and dying for me, you try to work that one out logically. When we start to try to work everything out logically, we can miss the true meaning, or we can begin to doubt. We can begin to, something bad happens to us, and I begin to logically think, well, if this bad thing is happening to me, then God must not be for me. Or, we look at the world today. I can look at the world today and think, man, this world is an absolute mess. And the logic thinking part of my brain can think, there's no way this is ever going to get better. There's no way any good can come from this. And it can begin to darken my sense of wonder at what Jesus actually came to do. So yeah, we have logic, but we also have faith that we can rely on, because logic doesn't always get you where you want to go. There's been times, especially now that I'm building my house, remodeling my house. It feels like I'm building a house. Where I'm going through, man, and I feel like I've just measured it, and I've got it all just down to a T, and I'm like, man, this is going to work perfect. And then I put it up, and I take a step back, and I think, man, I don't really like that. That don't look good. I did something wrong, or, I'm laying flooring, and the pieces just don't match up right. And I'm like, I thought I measured that. So logic doesn't always get you where you want to go. There has to be faith involved. There has to be faith. When I think about my kids and their faith, their belief in Santa, that childlike faith, that's where we have to get to sometimes. When I look at the faith my kids have in me, sometimes there's been times where they're up on top of like a play set or something, and they'll say, Dad, and about the time I look at them, they're already jumping. And they're like, he'll catch me, it's fine. Sometimes it takes that kind of faith. The second one I want to talk about is life. Now, this one's a really big one because I feel like it can affect all of us, right? Life can really begin to draw us back into the dark when it comes to Jesus' birth and that enchantment. Life can really begin to pull us away from the true meaning of Christmas, because life can be super hectic. Life can be super busy. I talked about that shift, right, that comes when you get a little older with Christmas. And Christmas is a wonderful time, and it is a time to be with family and with friends, right? But sometimes we can pack our holidays so full. There's times where that shift happened, and now not anymore, but I used to almost dread Christmas, because I'm like, man, we're going to be so busy. I'm going to be running here, running there, doing this, doing that. I'm not going to be able to breathe for like 2 weeks. Because life can get you to that point. If we don't take time to slow down in our life and really focus on the meaning of Christmas, we can get so overwhelmed by all the obligations and all the duties in our daily life that Christmas and the miracle of Christmas can slowly pass us by. There has to be a time in our life where we really begin to slow down and to think about what Christmas means, and think about the miracle of the birth of Jesus. There was, and sometimes I like to throw myself a pity party, not often. Why are you smiling? Not often, but sometimes I get down in these moods, I'm like, man, I'm just so busy, I have time for nothing, I just run. And then I begin to read the Gospels, and you want to talk about busy. You look at Jesus' life. Man, after Jesus started his ministry, that was nonstop busy. I mean, that guy Jesus couldn't go anywhere without crowds just surrounding him. And every time he'd try to get away, it feels like they'd find him and they'd surround him again. And I mean, he was going from town to town, healing the sick, preaching the gospel. Jesus was busy. Anytime I've thought I was busy, no, Jesus was busy. But can I tell you, anytime I face a problem in life, I like to try to look to the Gospels and see if Jesus has ever dealt with that. Because if I'm going to model my life, it might as well be after Jesus. Should be after Jesus, should I say. So I began to look, and Jesus was busy. And in Luke chapter 5, I found this verse that really kind of spoke to me a little bit. In Luke chapter 5, and if you look in verse 16, right here, where after Jesus cleanses a leper, there's a whole lot of dialogue behind this. But then it says, but he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. As busy as Jesus got, he always made time to withdraw and to slow down and to pray, to get that strength from God. We can find ourselves so busy that we just feel worn down, and it's because we're not drawing off the true power source. If you begin to find time in your day, and it's always there, as busy as I like to think that I am, there's always time, right? I could maybe not watch my hour and a half of TV at night. I could maybe not, maybe wake up earlier in the morning as much as I like to sleep. But there's always time. And if we find time to really get away and to pray and to recharge those batteries and to just really begin to set our focus right, life won't overwhelm us. But when we begin to let life overwhelm us, it kind of draws us back into this darkened state where I can't really see the light. I can't really see the miracle of what Jesus has done. So then that can make our world just a little bit darker when it comes to the miracle of Jesus. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is lies. Lies can really darken our sense of wonder and darken that enchantment that surrounds Jesus. Because I'm telling you, this world will always bring forth lies to try to get Jesus out of the picture. Now, there's two different types of lies. There's external lies, which are lies that come from everywhere else, and there's internal lies, which are, to me, lies that the enemy likes to whisper inside our own heads to try to get us to doubt things. And can I tell you that there's lies from the outside world, especially surrounding Christmas, that say, well, you've got to buy the right present. You've got to buy enough presents. You've got to get more. You've got to do more. Because if you don't, your kids won't like you, your spouse won't like you, your mom will hate you. You got to make sure you buy the right thing, right? And then you see all these ads, and it's like, oh, are you getting the right gift? Are you getting the right thing for them? No, you got to buy this. No, you got to buy that. And like I said, that can kind of tie into that life, but it's these lies that says, if you don't have enough, then you are not enough. Or if you don't buy enough for someone, then that's really going to make them think they don't like you. We get all these different lies coming from outside saying Christmas is about the presents. Christmas is about the gifts. And so that will take our focus off Jesus. We begin to focus on the gifts. We begin to focus on, the giving of presents. I begin to think about lies, and I begin to think about some examples in the Bible and how even lies whispered inside, in our heads, because that could come from our own head. I get like that a lot where I'm like, man, if I don't do this just right, then nobody's going to like me. I'm a very, one of those people that if I don't do it perfectly, then it's messed up, And if I'm not careful, I can get into this sense where I let those lies run my mind, where if I don't do this right, then people are probably going to hate me. And I begin to think about lies that the enemy used before Jesus' arrival, because we had all these prophecies before Jesus' birth. You had prophecies of a coming Messiah. Even at the fall in the garden, you had God saying, listen, serpent, one day, her offspring is you're going to bruise his heel, but can I tell you, he's going to bruise your... So there was prophecy all the way back to the fall. And so you figured with all these prophecies and all these things that had taken place before Jesus' arrival, that when he did show up, everyone would be like, hey, that's him. I know it from the prophecy. I've heard it. I've read it. That is him. But they allowed lies that the enemy spread inside of them to dictate what they thought the Messiah should be. You know, they were looking for someone who was going to come and actually deliver them from the Roman rule. They were looking for somebody to come and reestablish a physical kingdom. They weren't looking for a baby in the manger. They weren't thinking spiritually. And I feel like it's the same way today. We get so focused on the physical that we miss everything spiritual. We get so focused on the physical. I mean, even if what we expect Jesus to do for us, right? Well, Jesus, he didn't heal me, so I don't know what I did. I didn't get the car I was really praying about, so I don't know what I did. And those are all lies saying that Jesus' love equates to physical blessing, but there's so much more that we are missing in the spiritual world that Jesus has done. You know, when he came and he was born, they were looking for someone to physically deliver them from their oppressors. They weren't looking for someone to come and spiritually deliver them. But when I think of Jesus' birth, I think of this epic battle in the spiritual realm. You know, because can I tell you, there is a spiritual realm. There is battles going on. There is angels. There are demons. There is good and evil waging war that we can't always see. So there's a lot more going on, and there was a lot more going on when Jesus was born. Because I read something interesting. You know, I began to read about how, sometimes we don't think about it, but when we think about Satan, you know, can I tell you that Satan doesn't know everything like God. You know, we think of God and how he knows everything. He's omnipotent. He's omnipresent, right? Satan's none of those things. Now, does Satan know the Bible? Yeah, he does. But when that prophecy was spoken down by God at the fall, when he was like, she's going to have offspring, and yeah, you may bruise his heel, but he's going to bruise your head, Satan didn't know who God was talking about. Satan didn't see forward 2,000 years and be like, oh, okay, I know who that is. And so there was an epic battle going on because, yeah, he may have knew something was different about Jesus. You know, there was no denying that. So he was trying everything he could to stop him. When you look at the temptation in the desert or when he went out into the wilderness, you know, Satan was trying everything. But when I begin to think about that he didn't know that and that there's just so much more going on, and that sometimes it's not all about the physical. It's about the spiritual. We need to begin to look at the spiritual side of things. We need to begin to look, because when we only focus on the physical, can I tell you, there's going to be times where you become disappointed and it's going to make you doubt. It's going to draw you a little further into that darkness. And so we get to a point, if we let all three of those L's drag us back down, we find ourselves back in a state where Jesus brought us out of. We find us back in a state of darkness. And if I could have Pastor Kai turn the lights. Now, I really tried to make it as dark as possible in here, to try to, and I know it won't be like pitch black, right? Oh, that's out there. That's my bad. I wanted it like cave dark. You know what I mean? I was like, man, I was about ready to start taping trash bags on the windows. And they're lucky I brought trash bags. They weren't long enough. And I don't know what these stage lights are tied to. I think he's out there working on it. Oh, are they all the way over here? Oh, I think, okay, he might have went to do that. But I really wanted it dark because what I wanted to show was, one, what it was like before Jesus' birth. And two, I wanted to show where, if we're not careful, we can find ourselves. Because the scripture I'm going to read, and I'm going to tell you right now, I probably could have read this scripture and just preached solely off this scripture because this scripture preaches. But I wanted to kind of show us the excitement that we should feel for the coming of Christmas. I wanted to show us the excitement that should be building as we get closer to Christmas because I wanted to take us back. Let's take us back to the year of Jesus' birth. You know, in 2 weeks' time, a Messiah was going to be born. In 2 weeks' time, there was a light coming that was going to shine into this darkness. You know, and I began to read about Advent, you know, because that word was brought up. And they do this thing for Advent that I thought was really neat, and it's with the candles, right? So I've got some candles. And what you do is every week, so we had the first week, and they would light one candle. And you can kind of see how that would illuminate a little bit of darkness. And then now we're on the second week. And so you would light a second candle. And what you do is you kind of work your way up. On the third week, you would light a third candle, and then on Christmas, you would light a big candle. And what it is it's showing that there's a light coming to this world. There was a light approaching. I mean, I could almost feel nature beginning to yearn for this light that was coming for humanity that was lost in the dark. And can I tell you, if you have found yourself lost in the dark, there is light in that. There is light that can guide you out of that. There was a light that was coming. Something prophesied all the way back was falling into place. And I could feel this excitement beginning to build. If I really took my mind back to 2 weeks before, let's say 2 weeks before the birth of Jesus, I could feel that excitement begin to build. Because in 2 weeks, there's a Savior about to be born. In 2 weeks, the salvation of the world is coming. There is a light that is going to dispel darkness. You know, I begin to think about when Jesus was brought to the temple. And I'm going to find that so I don't misquote it. It's kind of hard to do in the dark a little bit, but I think I can get it. So there was, trying to find it. I think it's one over. Here we go. When he was brought to the temple, when Jesus was brought for the purification, there was a man, and I'm just trying to find his name. I want to say it was Simeon, but I don't really 100% know. Okay, we'll just say man because I can't read. There was someone there, and the Lord had told him, hey, you will not die until you see the salvation, until you see the Christ, the Lord's Christ born. And when they brought that boy Jesus, can I tell you that he immediately knew who that was? And he went over and he said, Lord, now you can let your servant rest in peace because I have seen the salvation of people born. I have seen that salvation that has been brought forth. Can I tell you, when I begin to think about Jesus, I don't just think about a little baby in a manger. I don't think about the songs. I don't think about, the little shepherd boy and all the nativity scene that comes with it. I think about there has been a light that has been shined into the darkness. I think about there has been hope that has been brought to this world. This world was in darkness. A hope has been born, and it is still shining forth today. That same hope that was born 2,000 years ago is the same hope that you can find today. And so I'm going to read through. Our main scripture today is going to be out of Isaiah chapter 9. But I'm going to try to calm down a little bit, because when I begin to think about that, I begin to think about all that Jesus has done for me and for his people, and I begin to think about it's so much bigger than me. You hear people say Jesus came to save you. He died to save you, and that is true. But Jesus came to save a lost and dying world for all people, for all nations, for all tribes, for all languages. He came to save a world. And in Isaiah chapter 9, and I'll tell you what, we can go ahead and turn the lights back up for me just a little bit. I didn't really think that one out. But I wanted to just show the contrast of dark and light. But when I begin, so we're going to be in chapter 9, and we're just going to start in verse 2, and it says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. And we've already talked about that. There was people dwelling in darkness. There's still people dwelling in darkness today. And can I tell you that Jesus is still shining that light today? He's still shining that light forth today. There is a lost and dying world seeking hope. They're seeking something, and can I tell you, it is Jesus that they are seeking. They may not know it, but they are seeking Jesus. And while Jesus' light is shining forth, can I tell you that he has chosen us to be his instruments? I begin to think of a flashlight. You have all the different components of the flashlight. I think of Jesus as everything, and we're just the lens that kind of reflects that light.
We're that lens that shines that light. You shine your light, that light of Jesus, into your world and watch it begin to touch people, because I know that we all know somebody who needs Jesus. I know we all know somebody who is lost in that darkness. God has chosen us to be his light. And in verse 3 it says, you have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest. They are glad when they divide the spoil. You know, death and darkness reigned, but Jesus came and he multiplied. And when I think about multiplying the nation, that was Jesus drawing all men unto him. There was no longer just Israel. There was the Gentiles as well were drawn into this family. He multiplied the nations. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor you have broken, as on the day of Midian. This goes back into that. It's not just physical. Jesus has broken the yoke of sin, and he has broken and shined forth into that darkness. He has dispelled it. When I think about what sin and death used to have a firm grasp. But when Jesus came, he broke that loose. And that's what this is prophesying here. It will no longer be, I won't be controlled by sin any longer. I won't be subject to death any longer, because someone's coming who's going to overtake that. And then I look at verse 5 and 6. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us. To us. I begin to think about that. To us. He did it for us. To us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. Because can I tell you, if you need advice, God gives the best advice. God gives the best life path. We call him Mighty God because he has never lost a battle. Can I tell you, there's never been a battle I've been in that God has lost? God has never lost a battle. Everlasting Father, because his care and his mercy is forever and ever. Prince of Peace, because while I was still an enemy of God, he reached out and rescued me. Of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. And that shows he came to rule for all eternity. One day we're going to be in that kingdom. But right now, can I tell you, right now, he is Mighty Counselor. Right now, he is Mighty God. Right now, he is Everlasting Father and Prince of Peace. And when I read through these, I begin to get this sense that everything is just so much bigger than me. Everything goes far beyond me. We like to think, in terms of us, but everything is so much bigger than just us. It is for the world. It is for all people that he came, and he is what he said he is here. We just have to be that people that reflects that light. We have to be the people that finds the darkness and shines that light into it. So don't get lost in the dark. And if I could have the worship team go ahead and come up. Can I tell you, life can get busy. Life can get hectic. We can find ourselves lost in the dark. And can I tell you, if you found yourself lost in the dark this morning, there is light. If you have found yourself in a place where Christmas is just another day, or maybe the birth of Jesus is just another story, can I tell you, there is re-enchantment. At the end of this movie, this little boy gets re-enchanted. He finds what he's looking for. Can I tell you, God is there, and if you search for him, you're going to find what you're looking for. The last little quote I wanted to talk about from the movie, there's a part where this boy is saying, the thing about trains is, it doesn't matter which one you get on, just that you decide to get on. And while that was an okay quote, can I tell you, it matters what train you get on, but you still have to make that decision to get on. And once you get on, can I tell you, you won't ever regret it. There will never be a time, there's never been a time where I've been like, man, I really regret getting on this train. because he's going to shine light into your life. He's going to bring that enchantment back. He's going to re-enchant your life and your sense of wonder at the birth of Jesus. And can I tell you, once we have gotten on that train, we need to begin to draw other people onto that train. You know, like I said, Jesus has shined that light into the world. Let's be the lens that reflects him. So let's worship God this morning. You know, as they sing these last two songs, let's just begin to make it a time of worship. If you have anything that you're needing, anything that, you know, we've talked about, if you're dealing with life being hectic, you're dealing with lies inside your own mind, you're dealing with your brain not slowing down and always wanting to make sense of everything and lack of faith, I encourage you to come to the altar, because can I tell you, Jesus, God will meet you here. And then let's just worship this morning for all that God has done and all that he is going to do. Let's worship him for sending his son to die on a cross for us. Let's just begin to give God glory this morning. Let's begin to just worship him. Not because I want anything, not because I need anything, but because of who he is. Let's worship God. And if you need anything, like I said, I encourage you, come up here. No one's going to judge you for coming to the altar. I know it's always kind of a scary thing. Oh, I don't want to step out because someone's going to say, well, I wonder what's going on with them. It's just between you and God. You come up here and he will meet you. Amen. As the worship team plays, let's worship this morning.